The fight is over, but what comes next? The case against Vice Admiral Mark Norman, the second in command of the Canadian military, dissolved after the Crown stayed a charge of breach of trust. Norman was accused, of course, of leaking confidential information about a Navy shipbuilding contract. For 2 years, his legal team fought to get the federal government to hand over key documents related to the case. Many were never produced. Now, Norman says there's much more to his story to tell. Was the government actually interfering in the case? What's the fallout for all this? Let's bring in the Scrum. Michelle Zilio is a reporter for the Globe and Mail. Tonda McCharles is a senior reporter for the Toronto Star. Craig Oliver is CTV's chief political commentator, and our special guest today is the former Defense Minister, Peter MacKay, now a legal partner at Baker McKenzie. Great to see all of you. I got to start with you, Peter MacKay. Both you and former Defense Minister, now Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, have said you've been surprised that during the trial, the Crown, prosecuting Mark, they never contacted you. Tell me about that, what happened, and what you might have said.
Well, that's right, Evan. We were both rumored to have been on a Crown witness list, but I simply didn't hear from them. I did hear from Marie Henein and Christine Mainville, counsel for Vice Admiral Norman, and I met with them at our offices here in Toronto almost a year ago, and we spoke at length about the procurement process. We spoke about my interactions with Mark Norman, and we spoke a little bit about how the defense was going to present its case. And this, I believe, has been a massive miscarriage of justice in our justice system, for the Department of National Defense, and for Canada broadly. This was a very dark chapter in the way that Mark Norman was treated.
All right, and they never contacted you, which is shocking, Tonda. I mean, the fact that Peter MacKay had things to say and talked to the defense a year ago and never to the Crown. What is all? Tell me your takeaway in all this.
There's so many layers here to unwrap. The fact that the RCMP, when they laid the charge against Mark Norman, set out that there was a time period that covered the Conservative government's time and power and supervision of that contract, and then they never interviewed any witnesses from that era, is astonishing. It smacks of incompetence. I don't care what the RCMP is telling its investigators right now, that pat, y'all did a great job. You didn't. It's also astonishing that as of November, when Marie Henein, after speaking to Jason Kenney and Peter MacKay, wrote an application to force the government to produce records, laid that all out in her application, that the RCMP and the Crown haven't interviewed any of these witnesses. Hello, red flag, go interview them. Right. And that at the end of it all, the defense came up with something. Was it the fact that Peter and Jason were telling everyone, look, you know, this is the way this thing went. They were following cabinet orders. He was implementing a decision of elected officials. How can you charge him for leaking? This is the way that contract worked. The fact that it took the defense to flag that and produce something new, we still don't know what was the anti-smoking gun, if we can call it that, that's astonishing.
Yeah, and in the meantime, Craig, there Mark Norman is almost bankrupt, finally gets his legal fees paid for, but the defense minister on this program just earlier said, well, I couldn't interfere with the process. What's your take?
Yeah, well, he's laying the whole thing on the chief of defense staff, who has got a lot to account for.
General Vance.
General Vance made some very foolish, inappropriate remarks in the wake of the charging Norman. But look, I think there's one thing a lot of people may be missing here, which is Andrew Leslie's role in all of this. Former commander of the Army, very close friend of the principal player here, and a man who knew everything. He had every reason to know what was going on here. I think it was information from him. I think he rocked the Liberal caucus when this loyal member of the Liberal caucus, he'd done a lot for Trudeau, announced that he was going to come out for the defense in this case. I think he had a lot to say, and I think that may have been more persuasive than anything conservative.
But he flagged that a year ago. He flagged that a year ago to them. Why suddenly, now, this week, after 2 years of investigating, a year after charging, does it all fall apart? What was in the 60-page memo that the clerk of the Privy Council wrote to the Prime Minister? Yeah. Why is the Prime Minister getting updated on a criminal trial?
Michelle, what's your takeaway on all this?
I'm looking at this from the political perspective. You know, we're in May, we're heading into the summer, this is pre-election season. The Liberals could not be happier they don't have to deal with this, that they won't have Mr. Wernick on the stand, that they won't have Mr. Leslie on the stand. stand, and that most importantly, they won't have Gerald Butts on the stand. And this trial was about to go before the courts in August. That would have been right before the election. So that's how I'm seeing all of this. And the questions of political interference, they will be out there until Canadians have all of the information presented before.
I just don't know what to ascribe to incompetence and a paranoia, and what to ascribe to actual conspiracy or political interference. I'm not there yet. I haven't seen hard evidence of that.
Okay, so let me bring in Peter MacKay again. Peter MacKay, accountability. I mean, we're trying to get accountability. Where's the accountability in this after Mark Norman's dragged over the gravel for 2 years?
Well, the only way you're going to account for that keel hauling is to either have an inquiry of some sort, or Mark Norman alternatively sues for compensation for what happened to him over the last 2 years. And add to that list that was previously mentioned, Scott Bryson, who many attribute much of this at the very beginning as an attempt to recast a contract that was let by the previous government to the Davie shipyard, and then the embarrassment of that breach. It seems to me that there was a great deal of malice and venal attempt to not only punish who the leaker was, but to send a message across government that this government wouldn't tolerate that kind of whistleblowing. And so there is a lot of accounting that is yet to be done. And I think there are a lot of people who we should hear from, just as in the SNC-Lavalin case, without restriction, without caveat, without privilege restrictions on what they have to say. Otherwise, Evan, my concern is that our Canadian justice system gets another black eye. In addition to the miscarriage for Mark Norman, this looks very bad on the prosecution, the police, and the entire system.
The one quality about all of this that really strikes me is the pure vindictiveness of it all. And this is why there is an echo here of Lavalin and Wilson-Raybould. That was all about vindictive too. Furious that they weren't getting their way out of somebody that they felt should just take their orders and shut up. And this is what damages the Liberals so much as they go into the campaign, that there are echoes of Lavalin. This keeps it going. At some point, they've got to get around to running an election campaign, and they don't seem to be able to get up on their 2 feet and get ready for it.
And part of the problem with both of those is that we are still, and Peter's right, the only way to get some of these answers is to have either a full accounting by the players, Mark Norman, Justin Trudeau, General Vance. But where are we going to get that?
Well,
I don't believe
he want committee hearings, and the NDP are saying they want a public inquiry.
There's 6 weeks left of sitting
not
here.
even. There are a few weeks left in the sitting, and I mean, Peter will probably agree with this. It's really, really hard to bring an abusive process suit against prosecutors. And so how does General Vance sue? Is he going to sue for, you know,
you mean Vice Admiral Norman?
Vice Admiral Norman, yes. Where does he sue? What does he sue for?
I don't think he goes after the prosecution or the police. I think he goes after the government, because let's not forget where this charge originated. It was the Privy Council office, which is the bureaucratic arm of the Prime Minister's office.
Fair point.
So Mark Norman, I think, does have a case to be considered. He has very able counsel. And in addition to any compensation, I hope he winds up as the Chief of Defence Staff. There's no disrespect to John Vance, but I think that Mark Norman will now be approaching 40 years of service to this country as a respected and admired representative of the Royal Canadian Navy. He has been an outstanding public servant, and he deserves that top job, in my opinion.
Wow, that would be a stunning transformation. I guess one of the lessons also, don't mess with Marie Henein and her team. Holy smokes.